evening, and welcome to the new FAFSA fiasco. I'm John Hupalo, your host and the founder of mycollegecorner.com, the college counselor for parents. That's how we like to think of My College Corner. Tonight, I'm really truly honored to welcome two friends who are also experts in all things financial aid. Over the years, they've worked with thousands of families to demystify the stressful, anxiety-producing process we've all been through. I have, as a father of two daughters who are out. But the idea of planning and paying for college sometimes brings a lot of stress to a family. But we are so fortunate tonight to have Gregg Cohen with us. Gregg, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. You are the founder and president of Campus Bound in Massachusetts, and earlier this year launched a really awesome new not-for-profit called College Affordable. We'll look forward to hearing more about that toward the end of the presentation. And all the way from Davenport, Iowa, Mark Salisbury. Mark, welcome to My College Corner.
It's always nice to be out on the coast with you.
Yes, virtually, wherever we are, it's just beautiful. But Mark founded TuitionFit. He's a CEO there as well. And he also started a very impactful not-for-profit earlier this year called Pathways Planning and Insights. You might have heard of Mark or seen his work. He's been mentioned in some really prominent education books. Jeff Salango's recent book. Our friend Ron Lieber at the New York Times, who writes great columns on this article, talks about Mark's work all the time. He's in Ron's book, Ron's college planning course. So we really are so fortunate to have these two experts with us this evening. For those of you who are watching, as I say, if you have a question, please use the Q&A. Apparently, we didn't set this up, so the chat's not working, but the Q&A is working really well. We'll monitor that as we're going along. We are recording this. We'll send the slides to everyone. In fact, we have a truncated slideshow tonight. What I'm going to do, though, is send you what would have been the slides. We wanted this to be a conversation. We don't want you focused on the screen. So I will send the slides separately. I want you to be aware of two things, though, when we start. One is that we need to generalize our comments tonight. We really can't give specific advice about your situation. It's clearly, your family's financial circumstances and other issues related to your family get into a lot of complications. So for right now, we really want to level set the field of what's going on with the FAFSA and the Student Aid Index. On that note, I'll tell you that you have to understand, from our perspective, we're providing the best information we have, which right now is just guidance from the U.S. Department of Education. They've, for the last year or so, have been sending information out about what's going to happen with the new Student Aid Index and the FAFSA form. And although we don't expect any material changes coming in the next several weeks, that guidance won't be set in stone until we actually see the new FAFSA form. But we're really confident that we have a very good handle on what's happening here. So before we actually get into the FAFSA and the Student Aid Index, there is one elephant in the room. And Gregg, I'd like to ask you, just talk about this for a minute. About 400 schools require families to file both the FAFSA form and another financial aid form called the CSS Profile. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the CSS Profile is a form put out by College Board. So the same people that bring in the AP tests and the SATs and a whole host of other services and tools. And this form is used by about a few hundred colleges to give out their own money. These are typically more selective private colleges, and they want more details than what's on the FAFSA form. So it goes into detail about some things that aren't on the FAFSA and some tricky questions in there, but they're using that to give out their pile of money, where other schools are using the FAFSA. So now some of these schools also, if you're divorced or not married, may ask information about a non-custodial parent. So at most of those schools that require the profile, they also require a non-custodial form of the version of the form as well. Not all, but a lot do.
Yeah, it sounds like we could spend the whole half hour just on the profile. Mark, just a 50,000 level. Gregg talked a little bit about it. Is there any other differences in the FAFSA form that we ought to talk about at the moment?
Well, I think the biggest difference is just that the FAFSA doesn't ask for nearly as much information. The CSS Profile is really a deep dive into every aspect of your family's financial situation. The FAFSA is really more focused on identifying families that will qualify for public need-based aid. Primarily the federal government's public need-based aid, the Pell Grant, SEOG grant, But then there's a number of states that also use the FAFSA as their sort of measure for whether a student's going to qualify for the need-based aid from that state. But that's public money, and that's really the primary focus of the FAFSA, while the CSS profile is, as Gregg said, used by the schools then to make decisions about their institutional aid.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good segue. There's one other elephant in the room that I do want to talk about very briefly, and that is the difference, as you said so well, Mark, between need-based aid and the other kind of financial aid, merit-based aid. So need-based aid is objectively calculated. There's math involved. There are formulas. The form that is used is either the FAFSA form or the profile, and it's really done to just calculate what is the need for that particular student. Merit-based aid is subjectively awarded by colleges. They were trying to round out their class, so they'll give money for geographic, someone coming from a place that they're looking for some students. My daughter was a beneficiary of some of that money, or maybe a great musician or football player. But again, high level, need-based aid, which is what we're going to talk about now, and then there's merit-based aid as well. So it's important for at a very high level for families to understand that.
And I just want to jump in there, John, if I could, on merit aid. I think that it's not only for a talent like an athletic talent or an artistic talent, but just how a student is perceived in the college's applicant pool. And it doesn't matter about need-based, about your finances. So it's a great way for people to get their tuition lower, even if you don't qualify for a significant amount of need-based financial aid. And you can shop for schools with that in mind, and it can really make a big difference.
Yeah, that's really a great point. You don't need to fill out an application. In fact, in my daughter's case, she received her acceptance, and then something from the financial aid office, she got married. Like, what was that about? So thank you for making that point. I think it's really important. What we want to be able to do tonight is really focus on need-based aid that results from filing the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, and the resulting student aid index, the SAI. And we're going to really do this in two parts. We'll go through the details at a pretty good level with the SAI and starting with the FAFSA form. And then after that, what I'd like to do is ask Mark and Gregg to talk a little bit more about their work with TuitionFit and Pathways, Campus Bound, College Affordable. And then we're going to end with 5 really important takeaways for this webinar, and then 5 things that everyone out there now can do right now. It's an action thing, what you can do now to file the FAFSA when it becomes ready. So why don't we just jump right into it? Gregg, why don't you start us off? The FAFSA has been around since 1992, and yet we have in the title, the new FAFSA, a fiasco. We're asking the question, it's been here since 1992. Why is new in the title?
So this year, they're launching a new version of the FAFSA. It's the first time in a long time that they've done that. There was a law passed as part of the COVID relief bill 3 years ago. It was supposed to come out last year. It got pushed down the road, and now it's finally coming out. And there's some pretty significant changes to the form itself. It's being streamlined. It changes to the formula that's used to determine your eligibility for aid, changes to the workflow, and it changes how what's going to show up on packages. So there's a terminology's changed. So a lot of things have fallen out from this new law that came out for that.
And one of the things that we're going to try to be careful of tonight is that for those of you who haven't filed the old FAFSA and got what was known then as the expected family contribution, the sort of what happened in the past is less important than where we are now. So we're going to try to focus as much as we can on sort of what's going on with this new form. But we will talk about the differences, because for those of you who filled out the form before and have a child in college, you're going to have to go through this new process the next time you file for financial aid. And if you have a senior in high school, you have to use this new form. So the new form is the game that's in town, and that's really what we want to talk about. So Gregg, other than the Department of Education, who else would use information or output from the FAFSA form itself?
So the FAFSA data goes to the colleges. So you'll indicate on the form who you want to see the FAFSA. So that information is used by the colleges to determine what federal money you're eligible for. And also many schools, other than those 400 that are on the profile form, they'll actually use that to give out their own money. So that's their formula. That's their basis for giving out their institutional money, which can be pretty significant. It's also sometimes called scholarship providers will want to see that information to give out as part of their awarding process too. So you may have to provide the output from this to somebody if you're applying for a scholarship over the course of maybe, the second half of the school year.
Great. Well, let's dig actually now into the FAFSA itself. So who is the person responsible for filing that FAFSA form? Is it the parent, a student? Who gets involved in actually filling out that form?
So it's both the student, and if there's a parent, then a parent. What happens is the student and this is one of these new process changes. The student starts the FAFSA. They'll have their own ID. They'll start the FAFSA. Then they ask or they invite their contributors, and the contributor, usually a parent, is then going to be will get an email and then have to fill out their part of the financial information.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Mark, maybe you can talk a little bit. Gregg said, the student's going to start, they're going to get their ID. What ID was he talking about there?
Well, there's a pretty another acronym, as if we don't have enough in higher ed already, called the FSA ID, and that's what the student has to start with. And that's the one thing that folks can do right now is go on and get their FSA ID, because that's the ID they're going to need to then log back in to the FAFSA and fill it out. And the student has to do it, and then, as Gregg said, invite other contributors.
Yeah, that's really important. And the government site, studentaid.gov, is the place where you'll find all this information. So studentaid.gov is really important. And as I understand it, the student needs an FSA ID, and they're going to use that during their entire career. They'll use it if they get student loans, if they want to go back and check. They're going to use that multiple times from multiple sources. You can read more about that. But also then the parent, if I understand this right, they need their own separate FSA ID. So both the parent and the student need to go at studentaid.gov to get that individual unique user ID. Is that right?
Yeah, and one of the things that's probably useful for people to know is, because a lot of parents will ask, well, why do we have to do it this way? I'm the one that knows everything about my family finances. It's because during the period of time that this student will be using the FAFSA and going through this process multiple times every year, is that they will go from being a minor to being an adult. So while when they're an adult, then there's a whole set of other sort of legal frameworks that play in here, that the student could actually do this themselves if they become independent, or if they would just say, I don't really want to share this with mom and dad for whatever reason. The student still has that, want to have that capability. So you also have lots of students that use the FAFSA when they're already well into adulthood, right? So that's why this starts with the student setting up their FSA ID and then asking the parent to contribute. And one question that's a good question that is asked here in the Q&A, will they have to get a new FSA ID? So if the students already had done the FAFSA in the old version and now they're going to continue with the new one, Gregg, I don't believe they have to get a new FSA ID.
No. That ID will still work. ID will still work. And as a parent too, the parents may have an ID from another child or themselves, even if they went back to school as an adult or something, and so it would be the same ID will work for as before.
That's great. So we're going to start off. We're telling our audience, go and get the FSA ID. You can do it tonight afterward if you're bored, or tomorrow, but you can do it right away. Start that whole process to get the FSA ID. We haven't hit this point yet, but the FAFSA form should have been out on October 1, but because of the changes that Gregg talked about earlier, we're going to see it, according to the Department of Education, sometime in December. So we'll deal with that question in a moment. But just to sort of continue the progression, I've got my FSA ID. I'm going to go on that form when it's available. What information do I need then to fill out the FAFSA form? What comes next?
So they're going to ask a whole host of information. The most important thing to have handy, I think, still is, and you may or may not need this, but it's your tax returns, W-2 forms from that year. In the year they're talking about is what's called prior year. So if you're, and that is a whole another language of the federal government that you don't hear elsewhere in your life, right? What they're doing now is it's basically a staggered on a 2 years. So for the class of the students that are going to school in the fall of 2024, it's your 2022 financial information. You'll need information about savings and investments, especially not in retirement investments. So if you have stocks, mutual funds, there'll be demographic information you'll need. So to create the ID, you'll need your social security numbers. So those are the big things.
Yeah, thank you. And so this prior year, it's a really weird term, and God only knows why, but it's the federal government. But the way I remember this, I was confused by this for a long time. The simple math that I did is, okay, if the student is going to enter school in 2024, so next year, prior year means -2. So 2024 -2 tells me I need the 2022 tax return. And so for the 2025 class, they're going to need the 23. And so that's one way, I think, maybe to try to unpack that, make it a little bit simpler for folks. Is just take the year you're going to enter school, you need financial aid, subtract 2 from that number, and that's the tax year, the calendar year that you want. One clarification on this. So we know that those tax returns are there. We also know that in the name of simplification, the Department of Education has worked now with the Internal Revenue Service to connect the dot there so that you can have an automatic download. And I did this with my daughter. She's a graduate student. In the spring, she was filling this out. She said, wait a minute, they want me to connect to the IRS. Why would I do that? And so there's like, I'm from the IRS and I'm here to help you is not something that we think about. So, well, is this a helpful tool? Is this something that parents should have some trepidation about, or do you just go do it? Mark, what do you think?
Well, in the new version, they're no longer going to be hey, would you like to connect to your taxes? Would you like to pull that over? In the new version, it's, yeah, we're pulling it over from your taxes. You're welcome. So it's no longer an option. It's now going to be the default that your information will be brought over from your tax returns. Now, we know that there will be all kinds of instances in which this won't work, because of whatever changes have happened between that prior tax return and now, right? Maybe a parent remarried, maybe a parent divorced, all of those things. And then there will be some extra hoops you got to jump through. But now they're automatically bringing data over from your tax returns, which frankly makes it a little bit easier if you're one of those folks for whom it's simple.
There's a great question in the chat, which is exactly where I wanted to go next. And that is, so whose financial information do we need? So we know we need the students, right? Because they're there. And we're talking tonight about dependent students, which means they're going to have to drag in somebody else. And so the question in the chat is, for a divorced family where parents are 50-50 and no child support, who fills out the form? Parent who claims them? It changes it. How does all that work? So the general question is, who gets dragged into this? Who does the students, who are they calling to say, okay, you need to go get an FSA ID because you have to give me your financial information for this form? How does that work? Greg?
Yeah, so for that one, that's a big change. One of the changes. So when a family that is married, then it will be both parents' financial information. If you're divorced, the new rule, it used to be whoever the student lived with more than 50% of the time in the prior 12 months. Now, going forward, it's who provides more financial support. Is the person that's supposed to be responsible for filling out that form. And so in that case, it would just be that parent's information. Now, if that parent is remarried, the step parent's information would also be included. Now, if the student is, there's under guardianship or there's an independent status, then obviously, that wouldn't be included in that. It would just be the student's information at that point. But if parents were never married, then both parents' information will be included.
Great, thank you. That's a little bit of a ball of wax. Mark, anything else? Anything to add to that point?
No, it is a new scenario here now where it's supposed to be, which parent did the student get the most money from, right, over the past 12 months. And There hasn't been great guidance from the Department of Education about how to figure that out exactly. There's been a lot of people who've asked that question. But what they have said is, don't just think about child support as the only money that is determining which parent is providing the most financial support. So you need to take into account if the student is living with a parent who's renting an apartment or has a house and has house payments and is paying for food and other insurance and driving the kid around to different things while the other parent is providing child support. If you start adding all that stuff up and you get anywhere close to 50-50, then at least you're in the ballpark and understand, okay, then we can go with the student, with the parent who the student has lived with the most. It's just trying to, this little wrinkle has added a layer of, I think, a little confusion and angst right now more than anything else. But at the end of the day, most cases are going to be such where you're still in the 50-50 ballpark. And there certainly hasn't anything's coming out. Nothing has come out from the Department of Education that has said, here's exactly how we're going to hunt you down and find you if you've gotten the numbers wrong. And we're going to audit your assessment of who's paying more money for your child each year.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is they're not going to know, reporting that parent that's filled out the form, but they may not have any information at all about the other parent. So
Right.
audit it is impossible. And one thing I also wanted to just add, and people get hung up on this a lot, is who claims the person on their tax returns. It can be different. So I know in a lot of situations when there's been a divorce and there's some settlement that maybe happened 10 years ago, and that's how the family decided to split up the responsibility, in the divorce settlement. It does not matter. There's a little wrinkle about how they use that to determine family size. I don't want to get into too much into the weeds there, but it doesn't matter. So don't feel like you're bound by who claimed that student in 2022 as being the responsible party for that. That's not the case.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Greg, because I see this with families, I'm sure you do, where is a 15 years ago, there was a divorce, and part of the divorce settlement is that they can, the mom and dad can alternate who claims the child as a dependent. And that's just part of the agreement way back when. That has nothing to do with the decision here, and people can not stress about that.
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat that I think gets to the point that you guys are trying to drive home. It says, my child lives with us. I support much more financially in addition to making more money than her biological father and his wife, but this lack of 22 file issue is an issue. And the question about the 22 filing is above that. The real question is, like, how do you really kind of parse that out, right? Can you tell what the federal government or the college board might do? Is there a real answer to this now, or is it really you have to just put the best information you can find that you have onto the forms, and then perhaps do an appeal afterward, or what's the right advice here?
Yeah, probably a little bit more about the situation. I mean, the rules state, that it's the person that provides more financial support. So if that's clear cut, there's like other things on there. You need to be truthful on this form. There'll be all kinds of language at the bottom of this form. The whole truth, nothing but the truth, and how much they audited, how much your risk. In the past, I have seen a long time ago, I saw somebody that had gotten themselves in a little trouble because they got something. The college sniffed something out when they saw that, and they have to be responsible for the government's money. They're the middle person for the government's money, and so they have an audit procedure. Now, how much they're going to go into auditing this particular data point, I don't know. This is brand new, how they can do it, but you want to be truthful in this form for sure.
Yeah, my best advice is always just to kind of play it straight, and if you try to skirt the edges, there are audits. They audit FAFSA forms occasionally. That all of that stuff happens. So, the obvious advice is to just stay on the path and do the right thing. Unless there's something else
here a second, John.
Yeah, please go ahead.
One thing for families that are in situations where there's a divorce or separation that I think is important to think about, or at least put out on the table first, is that if the situation is such that you want to think about, you know, the non-custodial parent or the other parent's financial situation and bring it into the conversation here, that means you're going to have a lot of conversations about money with them and back and forth, and the student's going to be in the middle of that. And so what you don't want is, and nobody wants this, is you don't want a situation in which the dynamic between the two parents is such that you can't really have those conversations about money. You can't really get at being, you know, sort of take advantage of all the things you're trying to take advantage of. The student ends up in the middle. The non-custodial parent decides not to fill something out because they're mad about something else. And it really ends up being an enormously traumatic experience for the student more than anybody. So it's really worth having a conversation or just thinking through, is this a road that we are able to go down before you even think about going down it? Because I've seen it enough times where, you know, they start to think about the legality and they talk about the details, and, you know, it's even more the case with the CSS profile when their schools are asking questions from the non-custodial parent. And if there's not a grounding or a foundation there that allows that conversation to happen and honesty to play out, that whole thing can turn into a bit of a dumpster fire, and we don't want that for our students. So think about that first as well. Just at least put that on the table.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, the whole college process sometimes is overly emotional, and when you get into a lot of these issues, you know, to try to divorce yourself from the emotion almost every time is the better answer. And I think your point on that is really excellent, Mark. Thank you. I have one technical thing. We talk about for the students who are going to be filing for next year, they're going to use the 2022 tax returns. But what brokerage information, savings account information, that sort of more real-time information do they use? Is it what they had in 2022 or what they have at the time the form is filed, or at some other point?
It's as of the day you fill out the financial aid form.
Okay.
Is that what the balances are there? And they know that, you know, balances can change from day to day, but so you take a snapshot of what it is, and you report it as of the day.
Okay,
and
that's great.
It's a self-report thing. So as opposed to them having tax returns and different schedules available to them, you're self-reporting here. And I think it's valuable just to remind folks, there's always the temptation. Well, if I'm self-reporting, remember that there are shadows on your tax returns of other money you have. If you've reported in dividend income, you've reported other stuff, there's shadows on your tax returns of that exist. So if you've got some wonderfully, you know, nice sized portfolio sitting around and you decide, well, it's just self-report, so I'll just put a 0 on there, there's reflection of that in the tax return. It's going to scream audit, what they call verification. So those things are not so easily hidden as you might think.
Yeah, thank you for that. And also, you know, this came up in a recent webinar I did, just the value of one's home. Oftentimes that's the largest asset that we have. So does that get captured on the FAFSA, or like how does all that work?
On the FAFSA, the primary residence is off the table. If you have secondary residences, yes, those you deal with. But on the FAFSA, your primary residence isn't a part of the conversation.
Greg, is that true on the profile as well?
No, it's on but it is on the profile. So,
okay.
You know, and that becomes something, if you do need to do the CSS profile, I know we're mostly talking about the FAFSA tonight, but the CSS profile, how you value your home also can be something that there's some subjectivity on it. You know, I always used to joke that you put myself and my wife in you know, and asked us blindly what our house is worth, we might be off by, you know, a decent amount of money, right? So you want to be pessimistic. There are ways that some of these colleges, these industrious financial aid officers might Zillow you, which often provides an inflated. Some people put their appraised value. So, you know, there's some thought that needs to go into this, which oftentimes the appraised value can be low. So, you know, I think that this is something you want to really be careful about in terms of how you value the house, because you can't be too aggressive, and because they'll catch you if you be too optimistic, it will cost you money. So you have to find something sort of, workable, that's reasonable on the profile. But as Mark said, on the FAFSA, don't worry about it. It's not even asked.
That's great. And whoever the anonymous attendee is who asked, are there changes to how the EFC is calculated? We're going to get there in about 2 minutes, because the EFC is of something of the past. We're moving on to a different pasture with that regard as well. But before we get there, there are a couple of questions I really do want to ask. And that is, one, students and families are very busy. Is it okay for them to wait a little while, once the FAFSA comes out and sort of, mid-December or whenever it comes out, should they wait a little bit and it'll be okay? Gregg, what's your advice on that?
Yeah, I jump right into it. I think that it's at least maybe a few days to see if there's, horror stories online about it. But, and to be honest with you, when the last time they made a changes to the FAFSA, there were some technical glitches. However, because of this delay in the release of it, which could come literally the end of December, the deadlines for the colleges to get the FAFSA to them may be really quick. So, because they need to get that information so that they can give the financial aid awards, especially for those incoming students. So if you're a senior in high school now, they want to get that award back to you so that you can make your decision with time, in time, because the clock will be ticking for the decision deadline for the April 1st or the May 1st deposit deadline. So you want to get it to them. I think there'll be a little bit more understanding this year, but if you delay a month and forget about it and something else happens, and life takes a curveball and you miss it, do it. So, I am hearing that it could be, the Department of Education's villainous ways. They might release a Christmas Eve and everybody that will be the support team will be off for Christmas, and you'll be left over your eggnog eating, drinking eggnog and, and cursing at the FAFSA form. But I think it is going to come late December. It could be just a couple of weeks before that deadline at these schools. So be on it. Even if it takes, you might have a couple of glitches, but I might have different advice when it comes out and I see all kinds of problems. But right now, I'm encouraging people to be proactive with it.
Yeah. In addition to the schools, go ahead, Mark.
Well, it's a really an all over the place thing, and we're dealing with multiple masters here, right? So yes, there's the school you're applying to, right? And some schools are on top of it and understand that there's a delay, and even are communicating with prospective students and applicants, which one person put into the Q&A. That's a fantastic thing to hear, because we have heard about a whole bunch of schools that are just saying, well, we'll just wing it. So, but there are other issues here. The FAFSA is also used by many states to determine the state aid, and many states don't have enough, don't put enough money in their aid budget so that every student that applies for that state aid can get it. So they also have their own budgeting deadlines that they still have to stick to. They don't really care about that the FAFSA is late. So there's going to be a whole bunch of issues at different states where the deadlines to get the application in may be very soon after the January 1st or late December or December 32nd, as we've heard a couple of times, right? It could be that. So you're going to need to get that, especially if you're in the ballpark for qualifying for any of this public aid. It really makes sense to be ready. And I think we'll talk about one way to help people be ready a little bit later, but to be on top of this, because a lot of these other organizations, their deadlines that they have to work with, or public institutions, states, municipalities, they don't really care about the FAFSA being late. They got other bigger issues to solve. And so their deadlines are still going to be their deadlines.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to move on from this topic in just a minute. There's one other technical, retirement counts, 403Bs, 401Ks counted on the FAFSA or the profile?
No.
Okay, great. We'll move on from that then. Last sort of big question before we get to the Student Aid Index, and we get this all the time, and that is, the question always comes, look, we're blessed, I have a great income, or maybe I have a lot of assets. And I know we're not going to qualify for financial aid. Should I really bother filling out the FAFSA form? Why should I do that? What's your best advice for that, Greg?
I'm generally not 100%, but I'm generally a proponent, especially this year, to do it. I think with this new form and some of the wrinkles to it, that it's worth a try. Definitely, it's worth a try if you want your student to have some responsibility, right? There's the government loan, so anybody that fills out the FAFSA form could be eligible for what's called the unsubsidized federal direct loan, and for freshmen, it's $5,500. $6,500 for a sophomore, and then $7,500 for the last 2 years. And these are not, it does not matter what your eligibility for financial aid, it's anybody can get it. And this is going to allow you to have the students have some responsibility. So a lot of people just psychologically want to have the student have some skin in the game. And maybe they put an incentive on it. They say, if you get a B average, we'll pay it back for you. So it's generally just, if a lot of people want that, even if they're not going to qualify for aid, I think there's the you never know kind of thing. It's a free application. It might be a headache, but generally we're a proponent, especially this year with so much uncertainty in the space. You may get lucky. There were definitely, I think, with some of the changes to the formula that we're going to talk about, how a school's going to do with the matriculation. Might they bend a little bit? Don't assume anything. So I'm a proponent of, I think, generally speaking, to give it a try.
Yeah, Mark, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, there are, especially as Greg just said, the formula for Pell eligibility has expanded the number of students and the situations that now will fall under qualifying for a Pell Grant. So it's certainly the case that you may not have qualified in the past, but you would qualify now because things are different. So it's certainly worth completing it from that perspective. The other reason that I think Greg was mentioning it too, is if you want to access, or you think you might want to access federal student loans, this is the only way to get there. Got to complete the FAFSA in order to get there. So if you want to have that option, just get it done.
Yeah, we're 3 for 3. I counsel all the time to do that, just for the reasons you're all talking about. Let's move to the Student Aid Index. So someone asked in the chat about the EFC, the Expected Family Contribution, which is now a thing of the past. Mark, just tell us, if you will, sort of same way. Let's start at the top. Like, what is the Student Aid Index, and why did they do this, and what is this all about?
It's kind of a funny story of an idea that sort of happens and then morphs into something that was never designed to do. The FAFSA originally was just about who qualifies for Pell. That's it. That's all it mattered. And somebody somewhere said, well, we need to have a name for the number that comes out the other end of the FAFSA formula. And so sitting around a table, probably somebody went, hey, well, we'll just call it the Expected Family Contribution. Everybody looked around and said, yeah, sure. Want to go to lunch? And so that's how they did it, right? And now it was called now. At that point, it's really just about qualifying for Pell. But then along the way, somebody says, well, wait a minute, this expected family contribution, that's what this number is, right? Yep, that's what it is. Oh, well, then it should apply to everybody, shouldn't it? Well, yeah, it's called the expected family contribution. It's not for only certain families, it's for all families. So colleges started to apply that number across the socioeconomic spectrum. So you could have an expected family contribution of $30,000, and therefore the school said, well, you ought to be able to pay $30,000 to send your kid to our school. From the school's perspective, they're happy because now they can say, you should pay us $30,000, even if that family has no chance of coming up with $30,000. So over time, this thing morphed into a thing that really started to cause some real angst in the system. And this is the biggest reason why the federal government, with this new formula, the simplification, they said, all right, we're not going to call it expected family contribution anymore because it's such a loaded term. So we're going to call it the Student Aid Index. So now it's just an index. I don't know if it really does solve the problem of, it's a number, it's got to mean something, but it's now just a number that's supposed to reflect something of that family's financial situation. Not necessarily the dollars that they can spend to pay for college, but just a sense of where they are in terms of money floating around somewhere.
Yeah, the term index implies comparison, right? So on the high side, the top number is going to be basically full cost of attendance, right? And we'll talk about what that is. But so that's about the most you can have. And now in the new formula, they have it so you can actually have a negative number, right? It can be actually negative $1,500. So that costs a lot of, but this kind of talks about what you're saying is that it's really an index. And so can you Greg, can you just maybe tell us just a little bit of if I have a 0 SAI or I have a negative 1,500 SAI, like relatively, like how do schools use that, or how do you think schools are going to use that kind of information?
Yeah, I mean, I think the term index is actually good. Just to take off on what Mark and you're saying, it's this idea of like, this is a measurement tool to figure out how much net worth, or not worth, not really the right term, financial viability or strength that they have, which is what they're going to use to fairly distribute the money that they have in their financial aid bucket, right? So they've got a pool of money, that the college has a pool of money, either from the federal government or states that they manage, or their own money, and they want to equitably distribute that money. So somebody that's got a lower SAI stands to have a bigger bucket for them to fill up, with a person that's got a higher SAI maybe does a little bit better economically, eligible for less. So it's a way for them to measure or compare one family coming in the door versus others, so that they can equitably distribute their money.
Yeah, it's all about the money, isn't it? Either the federal government's money or the college's money or the parents' money, when it comes right down to it. And it's like, how much of that is the college going to get, and from what bucket? It's really what it's all about. So just on general terms, anything else just on the high level? I want to go into the formula a little bit more and do a little bit of comparison about what's changed, because there are some pretty significant changes there that are going to affect a lot of families when it comes down to it. But at a high level, fill out the FAFSA. I'm going to get back a number that's going to be the SAI. The colleges are going to look at that number. On that FAFSA form, Greg, I think you said it earlier, you're now going to be able to put in up to 20 schools that you can send this to automatically. So that'll happen. You can go and change and do whatever you need to do. But so that's kind of all in process. Just at a high level, the SAI is an index. Anything else before we kind of jump into the weeds?
I think so.
Well, this is where some of us have data nerd enough to go and try to run these formulas and see how they differ. And in many cases, the SAI is higher than the old EFC for families. And so it's really important for folks to sort of decouple that from the old implication that this is somehow the amount of money that I'm going to be able to pay for colleges. And the SAI is the number that the school's going to see and that you're going to see. And I think it's really valuable for people to know that knowing what your SAI is, or knowing what your SAI will be, is incredibly valuable, because then it allows you to know what the college is going to see and anticipate what assumptions they might make about your financial situation. It's sort of the same way that you would never not ask what your high school GPA is for your student until the day you send in an application to a college. You want to know that all along. You're sort of paying attention to it, right? The same thing's true with the SAI. If you know what that is long before, that helps you start to think about how colleges will perceive you when you submit that application.
Yeah, and there's a question
and how much money you might get from that college. And this is such a critical piece of it. You don't, if a student's, it's one thing if your student's a returning student, but if a student's a senior in high school right now, and you want to have schools that are financially viable. And so you might be pleasantly surprised that, geez, that school has a sticker price of exorbitant amounts, but we could never afford, but wow, I might get a lot of money from this school. Or it could be the opposite. You don't want a false hope that, we'll just have a bunch of schools and we'll see what happens. And then you could be in real trouble if the students accepted several of these schools, but they're too expensive. So it's going to give you some framework. And there's other ways to do that, right, Mark, about how to get some framework about what a school might give you. But I think that's so important that SAI becomes, this is how they're looking at me and how generous they might be. Can I do this or not?
Yeah,
Is
we have about
something,
10
especially for high
minutes
school
left.
seniors right now.
I want to move into a really important part of the conversation, and you're both kind of hitting on it. Let's talk about the sort of the positives and the negatives of like the changes in the formula. There's some questions in the Q&A about this, and I think it's really critical that we get into some of that. For instance, what would some of the negatives, and when we say negative means that the change is going to actually, or the new formula is going to make the SAI higher than what would have happened before. What are some of the key points there?
Well, to me, there's one huge one, and then there's one that's still pretty big. There's multiple things here, but the biggest one is the old formula used to give you credit for having multiple kids in college at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a family contribution. It would be split between two family members. So one year maybe you had one in college, and your EFC was say 30,000. The next year your younger brother goes, and now it's 15,000 for each student. So you're eligible for more money in that year. That's gone away. They wanted to make it equitable for those families that had kids 4 years apart or 5 years apart, because they're not getting that benefit. That's a big change, unfortunately. One of the other big changes I think is that business assets are now being counted. Mm-hmm. So if you're a small business owner, before you wouldn't have to report that. But now let's say you're a contractor, you've got a couple of trucks and some, that has some value. You're putting that on the form of whatever the value minus whatever is on the debt of that. So even small business owners, that asset's going to count on the FAFSA moving forward where it didn't before.
Yeah, and the small farmers in Iowa, same thing, right? Family farms going to be hit the same way. We probably could spend 15 minutes talking about this, but I just want to highlight those two very substantial negatives. One is, as Gregg said, that what some folks are calling the sibling loophole. I don't think it was a loophole, but somebody called it a sibling loophole. That's been closed if you want to look at it that way. So you're just going to have the SAI for each one of them. And then, of course, this bringing in and how to value, that's like a whole different discussion. How do you value a family farm? How do you value a business? I don't think we can spend any time on that here tonight. There's some really positive things, though, that are happening. And I think the way the Department of Education looked at the Student Aid Index formula, they said, we're going to make these two things that are going to affect families negatively, but we're going to try to offset that. They may not get it right as far as the full offset goes. But Mark, can you maybe talk a little bit about that? What changes have been made that could be considered to be positive, meaning lowering the SAI for families?
Well, I think one of the first ones is that and it sort of goes, I think we maybe even just skipped it, but the Pell Grant's gone up. The amount of money that you're getting from a Pell Grant has gone up substantially. And that's a big deal, right? The second thing is that they've made it so that the sort of ceiling for getting a Pell Grant essentially has gone up, has gone higher. So more families are going to qualify for a Pell Grant, and there's more families that just simply based on their income, just automatically going to qualify for it right off the bat. So you will, it won't even matter what the other numbers are. And that I think is a pretty powerful tool. And then, the simplification part of this, most of that use of that term was just about reducing the length of the FAFSA. The FAFSA was a pretty long and onerous form, and now it's intended to be an awful lot shorter. And that's not a bad thing either.
Yeah, it's gone from over 100 questions to under 50, so that should be very helpful. And I was thinking along the lines of, this is a very technical, jargony kind of thing, but there's something in there called the income protection allowance, which allows basically a shelter. So they've increased some of that. They've also made those who have saved for 529s, they've given a really nice opportunity there. It used to be that grandparent 529s were actually counted as income for the student and I'm going to say it was taxed at a very high rate. That savings the grandparents have done for their grandchild is out of that equation totally. So that's completely a gift, offsetting that cost of college dollar for dollar. Also, previously, sibling 529s, the parents might have had one for Sally and Jane and John and everyone. The FAFSA would ask, do you have other 529s for siblings? We're hearing that the new form will not ask that question. So again, another place where 529 college savings is actually being encouraged. And the last piece that I thought was really helpful is that there's finally seeing some light around the cost of attendance, and they've broadened that pretty considerably. There's a question in the chat about a cost of living, and we know that the sort of the need is basically going to be considered, the cost of attendance less the SAI is what the sort of relative need will be. But the cost of attendance broadened to include cost of a computer, books, transportation, personal expenses, room, and now they're separating out meals as well, allowing allocation for 3 meals a day, loan fees paid to the government for student loans also. Loan fees paid to private companies will not be as excluded, but I'll also note, as someone who knows a little bit about this, not many private lenders charge upfront fees. The federal government actually charge pretty significant fees, and those fees will be deducted. So there are some changes there that are meant to kind of offset all of that. At the end of the day, though, I think both of you indicated that most families can expect their SAI, if they're sort of upper middle income, to actually go up a little bit. Is that about right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you'll see that.
Great. Anything else then on the student aid index that we should have talked about that we haven't yet talked about?
Well, I think there's one small thing that I think is worth mentioning, because most of the conversation here makes it sound like, oh my goodness, you're going to be in a lot of more trouble because the student aid index number went up. The fact of the matter is that most colleges and universities don't award much money at all based on need. Most of them are awarding based on merit, primarily on merit, if not all on merit. And so the part of the philosophy here with the federal government was the FAFSA and the old FAFSA and the EFC had sort of drifted past its original intent, and there was too much worry about trying to identify people who make sure that people who shouldn't get a Pell Grant don't get one, and not enough on who are the people that need a Pell Grant. Let's make sure they all get something. And then, honestly, for the rest of everybody, let's not spend so much time worried about it. So this index, this SAI number, is going to be high. It's going to be a number. It's going to be an index that allows you to compare. But in many cases, if you're looking at schools that are like most higher education and they're awarding aid based on merit, it's not going to matter what your SAI is. That's just not going to be an issue, and it's not going to shape the kind of aid you get. And that, I think, is important for people to remember, that this isn't a thing that's now going to put you in some terrible detrimental hole, unless you're looking at schools that are incredibly selective and that give out aid based on need. And then they're probably using the CSS profile anyway.
Yeah, these are great points. And there's one other thing that I think is super important. And you both talked about this, and this idea about planning. And I think a lot of the confusion right now is, well, the FAFSA is not going to be available, and I have to apply to school, and I don't really know how much I might be eligible for. This is one of the reasons we're having this webinar tonight. And one of the reasons that My College Corner put up one of the very first student aid index calculators. If you go to mycollegecorner.com, more thousands and thousands of people, almost 10,000 people have used our calculators in the last month or so. And that will give you an indication. We went and looked at the guidance put out by the Department of Education, spent months and months with professionals like Gregg and Mark and others who really understand this and the nuts and bolts. And we put together a calculator that you can use. One of the journalists said in less than 8 minutes. You put your information in and you'll see, oh, I put in my assets, I put in my income. Here's how much my family SAI is going to change for both the student and for the parents. There are only 3 screens. At the third screen, you can go and print a report. So again, this is free. A lot of people have used it. We're really proud of it, quite honestly. We think the work that was done with our friends like Mark and Gregg and others have put us in a position where we can help you start to plan a little bit better about what you can do today to actually start to calculate the SAI, start to understand how this is going to work. So you're not in the dark, as Mark's saying. There are places people who are here to help you, and we want to be able to do that. So I did want to talk a little bit about that. Unless there's anything else, Mark and Gregg, I did want to give you both some time to talk about what you're doing in your other businesses. And when you're not talking to me and having fun on these webinars, what you're doing in your businesses at TuitionFit and at Pathways and also college bound and campus bound and college affordable. So if you want to, why don't we just start with that, and I will go and share my screen so that you can a little bit about TuitionFit and pathways, Mark.
Sure. Well, TuitionFit is a very specific project that I think is really useful in the context of this conversation. About 5 years ago, we started to just crowdsource the financial aid offer letters that students were receiving and find out just a little bit of information from the student and the family about their financial situation. We were collecting their EFC and their academic profile. We were collecting their unweighted GPA and test score, and then the state they live in, so that then we could see that college gives this price to that kind of student. Zoom that out by tens of thousands of offer letters that we have now, and families can come to TuitionFit for free, and they can essentially get a sort of Kelley Blue Book for college pricing to be able to see which schools are charging what kind of prices to students like them. So you can plug in your information and you can start to build a college list that fits your price range. Then at the end of the process, when you've gotten acceptance letters and you've got a financial aid offer letter, and the first question you're asking is this a fair offer, or how does this compare? The only way you can find that out is go to TuitionFit, you share that offer letter, we redact all the information that's private and personal, and then you can compare your offer to the offers that students like yours are getting from whatever schools they got them from. And it's just like a giant Kelley Blue Book for college pricing. Suddenly you can see and compare, and oftentimes that's the kind of information that makes it easier to make the decision that you want to make. So that's what TuitionFit does. Pathways is really just helping people understand, what do we do with all this information, all this money talk, all the financial implications of the choices that we make. Pathways, we do presentations at high schools all over the country just to help people understand the financial implications of the different decision points throughout the college search process.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We just love the work you're doing. It's so great to see that you're getting so much traction these days and trying to help families understand transparency about college pricing. It's actually good for the colleges too, and I think they're starting to understand that. So congratulations, Mark, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing, and we look forward to working with you down the road. Gregg, you want to talk to us a little bit about what's happening at Campus Bound and also College Affordable?
Yeah, so Campus Bound is a company I started about 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now. And I have to say now I was closer in age to the kids when I started it. And now I have two daughters of my own are in college, so I can relate to the parents on this call. But we have a team of counselors, and it's under the College Admissions. These are former admissions officers, longtime high school counselors. Many of them did both at some point in their careers. And they work individually with the families and the students to help them through all aspects of the process, whether it's finding colleges that are good matches, working on their applications, working on their essays, working on their financial aid forms. So we've done a lot of financial aid forms over the years, and those people on we have financial aid officers on the team and other people that really get into it. And we have different packages and different services that are available. It's basically all remote now. We started in Massachusetts, but now the video and Zoom has expanded dramatically since the last few years. We see students from all over the country and families from all over the country. From there, and a big passion of mine has been the financial side, as you might imagine, based on what you've been hearing about tonight. And so we wanted to be able to make the financial aid advice available to a larger set of families. And so we spun off an element of Campus Bound into a nonprofit, and it's a completely independent nonprofit that works with high schools, works with nonprofit organizations like community organizations to provide webinars, to provide ad hoc support, and in some cases with funding to support in a more in-depth way with filling out forms and loans and that kind of thing. It's all sponsored by local businesses, philanthropists, and bigger businesses too. Banks have been involved with it. So they're supporting their communities so that the families in their community can get the financial aid advice, because there's so much at stake. And the beautiful thing about all the stuff that we've been talking about tonight is, and we really try to hone in on with College Affordable, is by doing the financial aid process right, it opens up the door to so many more scholarships and grants, right? By knowing where to apply to college, that might give you merit scholarships or need-based grants. And that's a great way to maximize how much you get, and to know to do these forms the right way, and to pick the lenders that are the best lenders saves a lot of money. And that's what College Affordable's really mission is all about.
Well, Greg, again, same as I said to Mark, we've really appreciated our partnership over years. We've done some of these webinars before. If you go to mycollegecorner.com and on the webinar section, you can get those for free. There's a whole bunch of them right there. This one will be posted there as well. To close, though, what I'd like to really do is just go through 5 takeaways and 5 things that we've talked about that you could be doing now. The takeaways are the FAFSA is required to be eligible for need-based federal aid, Pell Grants, direct loans, work-study awards. The form is usually out October 1. It's delayed until December this year. The U.S. Department of Education, states, and others use the FAFSA information to determine financial eligibility. All 3 of us think it's a great idea for all families to file this form, because you just never know. You might as well do it. The student is the one responsible really for filing the FAFSA form, but dependent students are going to need a lot of help. They need income and asset information from a parent as well. You'll be able to upload that, not only be able, but you'll be required to upload that for 2022 tax information. And finally, the college and state filing deadlines, you really need to pay attention to these. I was at a conference not too long ago where one of the states had a January 15th filing deadline. So, there's no real talk of like what's going to happen, but just go and make sure you understand what those deadlines are. So our takeaways then are there. What we can do, the 5 things you can do right now. Use My College Corner's SAI calculator to estimate your student's SAI. Don't be in the dark on this, as our experts said to you. Also identify right now, have that conversation that Mark was talking about. Which parent needs to provide that financial information? It's really critical that the student has that and knows as soon as possible. Go to studentaid.gov and get the FSA ID for the student and for the filing parent. That's really a very critical thing. You can do it tonight. Know the college and state deadlines for filing the FAFSA. We just talked about that. And then finally, look for scholarships to reduce the cost of college. Gregg talked about that. There's also a scholarship search engine that is at mycollegecorner.com. Gregg and Mark, this is just spectacular. I really thank you for joining us, taking your time. I know you guys are really busy this time of year, doing all kinds of webinars, but we had a large number of people stayed on right to the very end, and I can't thank you enough. You're great friends of My College Corner, and you're great friends of mine, so I very much appreciate what you did tonight. Thank you.
And thank you, John.
Thank you.
Great job.
Yeah, and to all the participants, again, thanks so much. We will post the replay of this, the recording of this at mycollegecorner.com in the very near future. We'll also send around the slides. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. And I just want to say one thing, take a big, deep breath. It's going to work out okay. Planning and paying for college is a stressful thing in its own right, but the rewards are huge. So hang in there, and thank you for joining us tonight at My College Corner.